Ah, Goo Lagoon, everyone's favorite swimming hole at the bottom of the ocean? How did we never question this? Some fish can't even swim in it. Think about that for a second. How can there be a body of water like this if they're already under the water? Well, it's time for us to dive in and find out if Goo Lagoon is fact or niction. Okay, so what exactly are we dealing with here? In the show, Goo Lagoon acts just like the beaches us surface dwellers go to. It has waves, boats can float along on the surface, and beachgoers swim and can even drown in it. Since the inhabitants of Bikini Bottom specifically refer to it as water, we can rule out the idea that it's just some other substance sitting on the seafloor. Try to say that one 5 times fast. So if this is water, but this is also water, what exactly is the difference then? I mean, how is it possible that this fish is fine in this water, but he can't swim in this water? What's going on here? He's a fish, for crying out loud. Well, to find out, first, we need to learn about a little something called density, which is the measure of mass per a substance's volume, or D equals M over V. Density equals mass divided by volume, meaning that it's measuring how compact the matter is in any given substance. And it's density here that determines what'll sink and what'll float. This egg right here has a density of about 1.031 grams per milliliter. And this fresh water over here only has a density of 1 gram per milliliter. Since the egg then is denser than the water, when we place it in, it should sink to the bottom. Not too remarkable, right? But we can actually change what's happening here. If we add enough salt to the water, we can then increase the water's density, so now suddenly it's higher than that of the eggs. Which, if you'll excuse me for a second, I need to stir. Feel free to GIF this. Or GIF this. So here we go, it's all mixed up. Salt water, egg, it should float. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the power of science. And believe it or not, this kind of thing would also apply to liquids. Take, for instance, this canola oil, which has a density of 0.92 grams per milliliter. As long as the salt water and the oil don't mix, presumably the denser liquid, which is the salt water, should remain on the bottom of the speaker, while the less dense liquid, the canola oil, would sit on top. Now, since the egg is denser than the oil, but less dense than the salt water, we should put it in, and presumably what we should see is it floating on top of the salt water, but sinking underneath the canola oil. Let's try it out. And there you have it. Ah, it works. When science experiments work, no matter how simple, I always get super excited about it. So there it is, right there, proof in the pudding, my friends. The egg is sitting on top of the level of the salt water, but sitting right below the level of the canola oil. The same way a boat could sink to the bottom of Bikini Bottom, but still float on top of Goo Lagoon. So is it possible that Goo Lagoon is just denser water than the seawater that's around it? I mean, think about it. We added salt to increase the density of that water. What if Goo Lagoon was just extremely salty water? Well, actually, that's pretty realistic. In fact, it's something that really happens out here in the real world. Let's back things up a bit. Further, and stop. Millions of years ago, shallow bodies of salt water started to shrink and dry up. As the water evaporated away, it left behind large deposits of salt and other minerals. Now, over even more time, the water refilled and the salt layers cracked and shifted, releasing oil, gas, and high salinity brine. This briny water can be almost 5 times saltier than seawater, making it so dense, rather than mixing with the seawater around it, it remains separate and forms a sort of underwater lake called a brine pool. And if that sounds familiar, well, you've been paying attention because it should. It's Goo Lagoon. Who knew? Actual bodies of water under the water. Not only are they possible, they already exist. And for the most part, they even behave the same way that Goo Lagoon does on the show. They have waves, we've landed crafts on their surface, and okay, admittedly, this is where things get tricky. In the show, we see all kinds of sea creatures splashing away in Goo Lagoon, having a grand old time. But in reality, swimming in these brine pools would look less like this and more like this. But not because fish can't swim, I mean, except for this guy, but because brine pools have such high salinity, as well as an abundance of toxic chemicals like hydrogen sulfide and methane gas. This pool would be almost immediately fatal to any sea creature unlucky enough to take a dip. What? So really, the idea of a body of water underwater? Fact. Floating a boat on the surface? Fact. Fish drowning in it? Definite fact. But swimming comfortably at these sorts of briny beaches, we're gonna have to file that one under Niction. Some other substance sitting on the seafloor, 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 some other substance sitting on the seafloor. Yeah, skills!